We just talked about Neda, the young woman killed during those days of rage in Tehran 1 year ago. But what has become of the Green movement itself? Some of its true believers are still taken to the streets, but some government crackdowns and some government brutality has sapped its strength. Joining me to talk about all this, journalist Maziar Bahari, my colleague at Newsweek, who knows all about the brutality of the Iranian government. He was imprisoned on false charges for 4 months following last year's demonstrations. Houman Majd is an Iranian-American writer, the author of a wonderful book called The Ayatollah Begs to Differ. And Afshin Molavi is also a journalist, Iranian-born, who has covered the Middle East extensively. Welcome to all of you. Houman, you were just in Iran a few months ago. What is your sense of what the mood, I don't want to say on the street because it's such a varied thing, but among the people you know who perhaps were sympathetic to the Green Revolution, are they disheartened?
Yeah, well, the Green movement, I think there are some people who are disheartened, yes, definitely, because of the brutality of the crackdown, friends who ended up in jail, so on and so forth, and just the government's ability to squash any protest whatsoever. So that becomes an attitude of, well, why bother? Why should I go out on the streets and demonstrate? I'm not going to get anywhere. The government's powerful, it's in power, nothing's going to change. There's a little bit of that, but there's still the resentment. There is a resentment among many people, sympathizers of the Green movement, even people in the conservative camp who don't sympathize with the Ahmadinejad government. When you talk to certain mullahs and certain ayatollahs who aren't going to be very vocal in their, necessarily, except for with a handful of a few exceptions, aren't going to be very vocal in their criticism of the government or the Islamic system, but are critical of what's been going on, certainly.
Green movement was but one question only: where is my vote? That question meant, where are my rights as citizens of this country? And that question has not gone away. The manifestations of that question, that demand, has gone away because it's suppressed by the government. But the gap between the people and the government is widening. And more people are asking that question than before now.
Oh, absolutely. I'm sorry to jump in, but I think that Maziar is absolutely right. I mean, the issue was never about a revolution. I think we were somewhat guilty in the West of proclaiming it a new revolution, whether it was a Twitter revolution or whatever, Facebook revolution or whatever you want to call it. It certainly wasn't that. And the Green movement actually started before the election. I was there. It was the Green movement then, which was to bring Mousavi to power and bring reform to the government and to the Islamic Republic. When that didn't happen, it became, where is my vote? Because many people believed that their vote had not been counted. And then subsequent to that, it became about, I think, constitutional rights, not just the vote, but civil rights as they exist under the current constitution of Iran, which allows many things, such as freedom of the press, freedom of assembly, freedom to demonstrate. And these are things that are told to the people. People understand this. The freedom of the press is something that is your right. It is a right of under our Constitution. It is the right of the people.
So it's there in theory, but in practice is denied.
Practice is clearly denied, and it's denied to greater or lesser extents over time. Yes.
But I think, Fareed, the Green movement did start out as a "Where is my vote" movement, but I think it went beyond that. And I think it went beyond sort of to the generalized resentment that Houman was referring to. And as with any of these kind of movements, it depends on who you ask. Some people will say, I'm green because I want an end to this system entirely. Some people will say, I'm green because I want my vote back. So it really depends on who you ask. The government of the Islamic Republic pulled out the old authoritarian state playbook over the past year, and they marked all the boxes. You know, silencing and intimidating your opponents, even jailing them, including neutral observers like our colleague Maziar, check. You know, employing surgical violence on protesters, check. Blaming it all on the West, check. You know, deploying their massive state propaganda machine against the Green movement, check. So this was a very well orchestrated crackdown against a Green movement that is amorphous to begin with.
But is there some truth also, Maziar, you lived in Iran. There are lots of people who say, look, let's not forget the regime has some support, whether it's in the rural areas, whether it's among the poor, whether it's in Islamically minded communities, and they also have patronage. But, you know, the vote, even if it was rigged, this was a pretty 50-50 country or something. I mean, how would you react to that?
I don't think it's 50-50, but I think if you divide different high-ranking officials in Iran and political figures, I think Ayatollah Khamenei has more supporters than any other official in Iran.
The current supreme leader.
The current supreme leader. he does not have the majority, but the people who support him have more money because they're in power, and they have more access to arms. And I agree with Afshin about this question that where is my vote? It started before the election, and I think the bottom line here is about the supreme leader. Many Iranians, and I can say that the majority of Iranians, even if they don't verbalize it, they do not want to be part of this ummah that Khamenei, the current supreme leader, wants them to be. They want to be part of a nation. And this is not something that started last year.
Ummah means they don't want to be part of some big Islamic revolutionary movement. They're Iranians. They want to be Iranians.
They don't want to be. They don't want to be led by this God King that Khamenei wants to be. They want to be part of a nation. They want to be part of an Islamic republic.
What about the other leaders, Houman? Is it fair to say that maybe the Green movement has not been as well led as it could have been?
Well, it depends on, I think the whole thing took them by surprise, from the election itself to the protests. So I don't think the Green movement had a leadership that had a specific goal beyond initially winning an election and governing, and secondarily to that, after the election, to actually trying to see if they could overthrow or overturn the results of the election. So there wasn't this leadership that sat there thinking and plotting, figuring out what to do. So they were caught by surprise. So it's unfair to say that they're, I mean, it would be fair to say that they haven't been quite what some people imagined them to be. And I think the expectations were probably much higher.
Was it a mistake?
Well, if you want to believe that there should have been a revolution, there should have been an overthrow of the system, then it was a mistake. But Mousavi himself didn't believe that at the time, and I don't think he still believes that.
And he was a former prime minister of the regime itself.
I mean, in many ways, Mousavi was an accidental revolutionary. Whereas, I mean, and so the differences that were made early on between 1979 were not appropriate, I thought, because in 1979 you had a leader, Ayatollah Khomeini, who was uncompromising, and he was also had the benefit of being in exile, so he wasn't in any danger for many years. So he said the Shah must go. Mousavi was saying we need to reform the system. Khatami, the former president, is saying we need to reform the system. Also in 1979, you had the Shah of Iran, who was generally weak and indecisive. And he stood up in front of the television cameras and said to the people of Iran as the protests gathered, said, I heard your call. I heard your revolution. Ayatollah Khamenei, by contrast, stood before the television cameras and said, I will defeat you. And to go back
so,
up.
So
this is a significant...
In a strange way, people's sort of image is otherwise, but you're saying the Shah was actually too accommodating, and the current leaders have been much more hard.
He showed great weakness. I think every one of these leaders now in power in Iran were revolutionaries then. They were fighting the Shah. They just watched every move that the Shah made and realized where they were successful. I think what Maziar said is very important. It's a very important point that very few people make, abroad certainly, and is that the supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, regardless of where he's moved to politically or ideologically, does have a tremendous amount of support. When I say tremendous, who knows what it is, whether it's 30% of the people or 60% of the people, or as he thinks or his people think, 80, 90% of the people. It doesn't matter, but he does have. And that percentage is, as Maziar points out, well taken care of. They have the guns, and they number in the millions. And they are not going to give up.
This is not North Korea.
This is not North Korea.
Small minorities with access to the guns and money can maintain power. And even in the Khatami years, when he was trouncing his conservative opponents...
This was the reformist president.
The reformist president. The conservatives were polling, getting about 30% of the vote, even in those years when reformers were winning.
And we will be watching for it. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We will be right back.